Hi, welcome to another Rules Primer video. Today we're looking at a game called Divided Republic, which is a 2 to 4 player card-driven election game based on the election of 1860. The idea of this video is that it's going to give you a head start on learning or teaching the game, and it's not supposed to substitute for a full reading of the rule book, especially in this game because there's lots of kind of little rules that kind of break the main rules based on the different states' election methods, and I'm not going to go over those, so you'll definitely want to read the rulebook thoroughly before you start to play. But I'm hoping this video will kind of give you an idea on how the game works. I'm going to go over the turn order and the victory conditions, the different ways you can play a card, and then we'll look at some of the cards as well. And okay, let's get started. Divided Republic is played over a series of 6 turns, which is tracked on the turn track. There's also a momentum track, which determines the turn order, and also gives a bonus card each turn to the player who's first on the momentum. So on each turn, each player is going to get, at the first turn, 7 cards, every other turn, 6 cards, except for the person who's the first in the momentum marker, in which they will get 7 cards, and the Republican player who always gets a bonus card. So during each turn, there's going to be 5 actions, which are tracked on the action track, and during each action, each player will get to play 1 of their cards. So you're going to start the turn, you're going to each play 5 cards, then at the end of the 5th card, you get to decide if you want to keep your leftover cards and then draw back up to 6 or 7, or discard all of them and then draw all new cards. And then the next, you move the marker back from the action track back to number 1, and you move to the next turn. At the end of the 6th turn, we're going to do the general election. You're going to do the polling process, basically, which we'll discuss a little bit more later. And you're going to award each player, depending upon what states they control, these state cards. Each card has a value on there, which is their electoral votes. And if you reach the magic number, which I believe is... So if you reach the magic number, which is 152 votes, 152 electoral votes, then you win the game. If no one can get 152 electoral votes, then the election goes to the House of Representatives, in which case it's determined by the actual number of controlled states. So each player is going to count up how many state cards they have that they have control over, and then if there's not a tie, then that player is going to win. If there is a tie, then the game will end in automatic defeat for all players. There's also another way that the game can end in automatic defeat, and that's if South Carolina secedes from the Union and the Civil War starts early. And that happens if the Republicans actually control South Carolina. There's a random chance that that happens. And there's also some little different ways that that might happen too, in which case all players lose the game. Okay, so I said that on each action, each player will get to play a card. So let's look at the different ways that you can play cards, and we'll also look at the different types of cards in the game. Okay, there are 2 ways you can play a card in the game. The first way is to actually play it for the event on the card, which we'll talk about a little bit later when we look at the different types of cards. The second way is to play it for this number, which is called Political Control Factors, PCFs. And that's going to allow you to place these cubes, also called political control factors, into various states on the board. Now let's look at each state. Each state, as soon as this zooms in, why does it want to? Okay, there it goes. All right, each state has the name of the state, has the number of electoral votes that it's going to get at the end of the game, and then it has this number, and it has a hair on it for some reason. It has this number, which is called the PCR, which is Political Control Requirement. That's the number of cubes that a player has to have in that state to control that state. Now, that's not all that they need, though, because they also need a plurality, which means they need more cubes than any other player. So let's say Gray had 2 cubes in here, nobody else had cubes, then they would have control of that state. But if Florida was in here, if Red was also in Florida, now since neither player has more cubes than any other player, even though they meet the PCR, neither one of these players has control of the state. So when you play a card, let's say I played this card, Platform Speech Tariffs, but I played it for the points, so I would get 4 cubes to place. Now if I wanted to go to Florida, right now it would cost me 1 point to put 1 cube. But if Gray had another cube in there, okay, well now they've met the requirement and they have more cubes. That means that the Gray player has control of that state. If I wanted to go into that state now, it would actually cost me 2 points for each cube that I wanted to put in there. So this would cost me 2, so the most I could put would be 2 cubes. You also have to add each cube also costs an extra point if you are placing cubes into more than one region in the same turn. So usually I can spread my 4 cubes out however I want them to. But if I was going to put, one here, and then when I wanted to put one in North Carolina, since that is a second region, it would actually cost me 2 points to put this cube in there as well. There's some other rules. Some of these, for the Republican player, these asterisk states, they're not actually on the ballot, so it's a little harder for them to do things in those states. And there's some other rules like that you'll have to read the rule book. But that's the general idea on how you play a card for points. So now let's look at the different types of cards. Okay, let's look at the different kinds of cards. The first kind of card is just an event. In this case, it's John Brown's Body. Riots memorialize the death of John Brown. These cards can, help some parties, hurt other parties, affect certain regions, affect certain states. And if it has a asterisk after the name of the card, that means that you have to remove the card from the game after you play that in as an event, because, the historical event can only happen once. So that's a basic kind of event. The next kind I want to look at is an endorsement. These are famous political people of the time that endorse your party. So you can see this says you may add 1 PCF to each of the 4 Mid-Atlantic states. But this guy, John Tyler, who I'm sure we all know all about him. Anyway, he will not endorse a Republican candidate. He just doesn't like Honest Abe. So anyway, those are endorsements, another type of card. This is an interesting type of card, a scandal card. The candidate has been accused of doing something beneath his character. For shame. You select one party and verbally accuse its candidate of doing something untoward, and then you choose a state in which the party must remove half of its PCFs. So, you actually get to make up what they actually did, which is kind of fun. And I think there's also some cards that are called like spin or positive spin that help you get around a scandal card that can be played as reactions. Next up, let's look at the platform speech. These are kind of give you a random number of PCFs, and they're usually limited, or they're actually vary depending upon the region you're at. So you roll a d6 and then add the modifier, and these are the list of modifiers. And you can use these to actually subtract PCFs. You can add your own, or you can subtract them from other parties in a region. And if you do that, though, the other player usually gets to decide where they come from, where they're subtracting from, except for one of the parties has a special ability where they always get to choose their own. I'll have to drop the camera. Okay, and then finally there's this card. These kind of cards, which are regional polling. In a regional polling card, see this one says the lower south. You're going to initiate the polling. You're going to find those, so this is the lower south. And for each state in the lower south, you're going to determine a few things. You're going to determine who controls each state, if anybody, and you're going to hand out these cards. You're also going to determine if there are any locked states, and locking is if you have double the number of cubes needed for control and you have the most of any player, you lock that state once you put a little token, and then other players can't play cubes into that state. And then finally, after that, you're going to determine who has the most states, and you're going to adjust the momentum markers based on that. And then finally, after that, after the end of a turn on which someone played a polling card, you're going to reshuffle all the cards and make a new deck. Okay, so that's kind of a general overview of Divided Republic. I think I misspoke just a minute ago. During the regional polling, you're going to adjust the momentum marker based on the total number of electoral votes that the players control, which are, based on the cards in their hand. They're going to add up the electoral votes, and then that determines the momentum marker. As I said before, there are lots of different, there's lots of small rules that you'll need to go over. I didn't even touch on like the stronghold states, which are the ones that have the little icons on them, and the special rules on South Carolina, and the special rules on Kansas and Nevada. But I just mainly, with this video, wanted to give you a kind of overview on how the game plays and some of the rules, so that it'll make teaching and learning the game a little easier. So I hope you enjoyed the game, hope you enjoyed watching this video, and happy gaming!